What did Brian Callahan and Mike Borgonzi actually say at their combine press conferences on Tuesday? We're going to parse out everything that they said and what these quotes really mean. This is a bonus episode of the Music City Audible. Let's get to it. Oh, welcome everyone to another episode of the Music City Audible podcast presented by Broadway Sports Media in partnership with 440 Sports. I'm Justin Graver. With me, as always, Justin Melo. And Justin, I know we just dropped Shedeur Sanders' podcast yesterday. If you missed that, people, go watch it. Why the Titans must draft Shedeur Sanders. Not that we believe it, but we had someone on the podcast, Sam Phelan, who does believe it. So go check that out if you missed it. Back one day later, Justin, unusual scheduling for us, because both Brian Callahan and Mike Borgonzi had press conferences at the 2025 NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis on Tuesday, and we got to react to what they said, recap what they said, parse through the coach speak of what they said and figure out what they really meant. And also, Justin, I have a bone to pick with Titans media. No one in particular, just the people on Twitter who are tweeting out of context quotes and people are running with them. And I want to get to the bottom of what Callahan and Borgonzi actually said with this episode of the podcast. How's it going, my friend?
I'm doing well. It's interesting you say that because I'm going to put my hand up and admit I didn't get the chance to watch the pressers in their completion. I was the one on Twitter, paying very close attention to what was being said, clipping things of that nature. You actually went back and watched them in completion, so you've got a better point of view here. I'm going to react to what you've got to say because we've already gone through it off air, a lot of it. And I will note that you called this a bonus episode of the Music City Audible, not an emergency episode of, because I will say, let's be honest, you and I got a little lax with the term emergency a couple of months ago. Felt like we were dropping an emergency podcast, every other day. And one of my favorite Titans Twitter social mysteries, is it Arden Key or is it not Arden Key? If you're watching this, Mr. or Mr. not Arden Key, there's a gentleman in our YouTube comments frequently with the name Arden Key, who's got like a profile photo of Arden Key, who comments on a lot of these videos. And he said in one of the emergency podcast ones, y'all be calling everything an emergency pod nowadays. You and I had a good laugh about it because we did get a little lax with it. I don't know I don't even want to know if it's Arden Key or not. I want the mystery to live forever.
I choose to believe it is Arden Key. And if so, Arden Key, thank you for tuning into the channel. We really appreciate your support and everyone's support. If you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below. Give this video a thumbs up, like. But yes, I called it a bonus episode. We were using emergency podcast as a term that went like not in our regularly scheduled podcasts.
Right.
I think we can.
He was reacting to things that happened.
News items, right. But I think we can also start calling some of those things bonus pods and save the emergency ones for like trading for L'Jarius Sneed or, major events. But without further ado, let's get into it here. We're going to talk about what Brian Callahan and Borgonzi said at their press conferences at the Combine, starting with Brian Callahan. Now, like you said, I watched these press conferences in their entirety. I took notes on the things that I thought were interesting. And the first point of clarification I want to make is on a tweet that went out that Brian Callahan talked about saying that he would prefer the long-term solution with upside to, a veteran quarterback. Is that what he actually said, though? I don't think so. Here's the thing about what happened at these press conferences. These guys said everything. They said everything and they said nothing. They put indications out. If you took just a random quote from if you wanted to build the case that the Titans were going to draft a quarterback, you could pull a quote that builds that case. If you wanted to build the case that they were going to draft Abdul Carter at number 1 overall, you could pull a quote that builds that case. If you wanted to build the case they were going to trade down, that they were going to take Travis Hunter, that they didn't like Travis Hunter, you could pull a quote for all of those arguments and build a case with it. And that's the thing that we have to keep in mind here is that they are not giving away their actual intentions. They are not going to indicate what they actually think or want to do, because even though they have the top pick and therefore you'd think like they don't really need to hide what they want to do. And a lot of times, a lot of drafts will hear basically what the number 1 pick is going to be long before the draft. I think last year was the best example we had in a long time where we knew weeks in advance that the Bears were going to draft Caleb Williams.
Months.
I think before the Combine, like the reason Caleb Williams didn't throw at the Combine is like, the Bears are taking me. I don't need to throw at the Combine. So I think it's important to note that like even though there's not a real value in keeping it all a secret, there is, because of the trade down option, you don't want to give away to other teams how you really feel about these players, because then you lose potential negotiating leverage in how many picks you'd want back. Like, well, we love Abdul Carter or we love Cam Ward, so to make us move down in this draft, you're gonna have to really sweeten that deal. Like, there is reason to keep this stuff close to the vest. And the Titans did exactly that in these press conferences. So, did Callahan say that he would prefer a long-term solution at quarterback? He may have indicated it a little bit, but he also was straight up asked, would you prefer to have a rookie or a veteran at quarterback this season? And here's what Callahan said.
I think we're trying to get the best player, period. And whatever that looks like for us doesn't make any difference to me.
He put it out there. He's fine with a veteran or a rookie. And that may be because it's not ultimately going to be his call. And maybe because this is coach speak and he's not going to tell us what he really thinks or what he really wants. So is this a notable quote? Maybe in some ways, but I don't think we can take this and run with it, as you may or may not have done already for a story for Titan Sized, and run with it and say, Brian Callahan basically told us he'd rather be coaching a rookie quarterback, whether it's his decision or not, because he said both. He said that he didn't care if it was a veteran or a rookie.
Well, I was under the impression that what he said, as you pointed out earlier in that quote there, that he said he wanted the quarterback with more upside, essentially, than one that could provide immediate success and fit. And, I almost wish he did say that, because that would be a more fun quote to talk about.
He
right?
said that.
It would have indicated.
He said something along those lines, but he also, contradicted it by saying he doesn't care if it's a veteran or a rookie. So that's where you have to just parse through this stuff with a grain of salt.
Obviously, the first part would have been more interesting if the latter part didn't come, because as I was trying to do analysis on it, as I did write a story about it, it's like, the brain starts working, analyzing. Well, all the veterans are available. They're only immediate success fits. They all range. I actually did this in the story. Now I regret wasting my time. They range from age 33 to 41. The available quarterbacks that they could realistically sign. The only one that is Sam Darnold, being 28, might be the one exception where there's a long-term fit, there's some upside, immediate success, blah, 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 depending on how you view them. But Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, Matt Stafford, they're 33 to 41. So I said, geez, that quote sounds like he wants to get, potentially to get a rookie in here. And you always take these things with a grain of salt. But if he actually said that, I think you would agree it's a much more interesting quote.
Absolutely do agree. If he hadn't given us that contradiction there, that caveat. Sticking on quarterbacks, I'm not going to go chronologically here with Callahan's answer. Sticking on quarterbacks before I move to other topics. Something interesting he said was evaluating quarterbacks is not an exact science. And he was talking about, those traits that we have talked about in recent episodes, especially with Easton Freeze not too long ago, right before the Senior Bowl, talking about how the three traits that he, puts the most value on, decision-making, timing, and accuracy, was that, there is wiggle room there. If a guy throws with more anticipation but doesn't have the greatest arm strength, you can make it work. And Borgonzi said something similar to that as well, talking specifically about Shedeur Sanders, that, if you have the ability to make anticipation throws, you don't necessarily need to have the top-of-the-line arm strength. Callahan was saying there's a baseline arm strength that you need to have. I think this is sort of obvious and expected, but it's worth pointing out that he did say it. He also said that Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward are both worthy of being in the conversation that they're at right now.
They're both good players. I think they've earned the right to be in the conversations they're in. As far as where I see them and how I stack them, that's for me. But I do think they're worthy of those conversations. There's some other good players in this class too.
So I think that they're keeping all the options open with every single answer they give. Yes, I think both these guys are worthy of being in the first overall pick conversation, but there's other good players in this draft too. AKA, we're not married to taking a quarterback. If any other teams are interested in trading up to this pick are listening, there's some other good players in this class too, and we can't lose sight of that. So again, sort of obvious and expected, but also notable.
And clearly referring to Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter, right, as the only two other players he could possibly be referring to. I want to add to that, Borgonzi also said, again, notable, maybe not, could have been a bold-faced lie, could have been the truth, that he said Shedeur Sanders has, quote-unquote, plenty of arm strength, or enough arm strength. Certainly, I think, important to him, because if he says the opposite of that, or if he says, we're not a fan of his arm strength, which you're never going to come out and say, it would obviously remove him, or we would remove him from the conversation at number one. And there's no need to do that when, again, you want to leave all your options open and make sure if someone's in love with Shedeur Sanders, you want to make sure that they think you also like him and they've got to come up for.
Exactly. All right, moving on to other positions here while we stick with what Callahan said. This one was interesting. Tyler Rowland, who runs the Tic Tac Titans, host of Locked On Titans, asked Callahan a really good question. He said, when it comes to players that you've seen do what you want them to do in college, but maybe less physically gifted versus players who are more physically talented, but maybe you haven't seen them do exactly what you'd ask them to do in this scheme, how do you evaluate those kinds of differences? And Callahan, here's what Callahan answered to that.
Sure. I think the best way to put that is our job as coaches is to put players in the best position to have success. And I would never sacrifice talent for system. It's always going to be player driven and player first. So if you can find a great player, we fit them.
This to me is not exactly a Cam Ward answer. In fact, I don't think it's really a Cam Ward answer at all. But I do think we can apply it to Cam Ward, and we can apply it to everything that Callahan does as a coach. He has said this kind of thing since he took over the job, that it's always going to be about building a scheme around the players, that it's never going to be about making someone fit into your scheme. Yeah. Do coaches always do this? They say it a lot. Do they always do it? Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just got to interject for a second, though, because number one, I'll start with a positive. I do think that quote is very notable because you, I, everyone in Titans Twitter, we've all been guilty, and maybe we're not wrong, but we've been guilty of saying Shedeur Sanders seems to be the type of quarterback he would prefer, right? Because we talk about the anticipation, the timing, the rhythm, whereas Cam Ward has got more of the physical upside, right? And we know, Callahan, we can say with 100% certainty, based on his history and the quarterbacks that he's worked with, and even just analyzing his offense, that Brian Callahan is a rhythm and timing, wants a rhythm and timing type of quarterback, and that's the type of offense he wants to field. So we've ran with saying, well, that's more Shedeur Sanders than it is Cam Ward. Now, I'm probably talking in circles here, but it's also possible that he thinks Shedeur is the better quarterback than Cam Ward, so he could still think Shedeur fits the definition that you just said, but based on the general consensus, it's that Cam Ward is the more talented overall prospect. And if he's not afraid of taking talent over scheme, that even though we think Shedeur might be the better scheme fit for him, that he would still lean towards the better quarterback. And we probably think that's Cam Ward. Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate against myself here and say, even though he said that, I don't know that I believe it to be entirely true, because I certainly felt like they tried to make Will Levis fit a Brian Callahan offense this past season and didn't always do or focus on what Will Levis is as a quarterback, right? Didn't it feel like they were trying to make Will Levis more of a rhythm and timing quarterback? Whereas, we saw in the past under Mike Vrabel, what Will Levis was really good at was trying to generate those explosives with the deep developing shots. That didn't happen as frequently under Callahan. It's a totally different offense. To play devil's advocate against myself for a fourth or fifth time, Brian Callahan has also said they didn't always have the protection and the offensive line up front to even take those shots. So in the end, I said a whole lot of nothing probably, but it's interesting nonetheless.
You're just like Brian Callahan and Mike Borgonzi today. You talked in circles, you said every possible thing, and at the end of the day, it all equates to nothing. No, but I agree with you. I think that they maybe tried to tailor the offense to Will Levis's strengths, but then they had to tailor the offense to the offense's strengths, or more accurately, to hide the offense's weaknesses. I'll keep going on quarterbacks here for a second. There's something I want to come back to from Callahan's presser, but I'll come back to it in a minute, because if you don't know how the combine works, the way these things happen is you got 15 minutes with each coach and each general manager that chooses to take this time to go speak. They don't have to go speak. They can say, we don't want to. And there's some teams, I think the Dolphins GM, for example, is not speaking at the combine. Only Mike McDaniel spoke. So they didn't have to give this time, but they each give 15 minutes at the podium where anyone who has a combine credential can walk up to the podium and put their hand up and ask a question. After these 15 minutes are up, they usually will take the beat reporters who cover that team specifically into a little area off to the side of the podium or around the temporary barrier wall thing that's been set up there at the convention center in Indianapolis, and hold a little media scrum. Now, what you see at the podium, or what happens at the podium, is recorded by NFL media cameras and posted to the team YouTube channels, and it's run on NFL Network if there's a really exciting, interesting quote. Like, those are fully captured and recorded. What happens in the media scrums is for the people who are there only. So you will see some quotes, you will see some videos from Indianapolis on Tuesday that don't make it into that YouTube video if you go watch the full press conference of Borgonzi and Callahan that's there on YouTube. So I'm going to go to some of the quotes that were posted. Now, Justin, I cannot verify that these are real except for when video was attached. And as we've already seen, plenty of stuff has been taken out of context. For example, Brian Callahan never said if the Titans draft a quarterback number 1 overall, they will expect him to be a day 1 starter. That was not said. That was tweeted, and people are running with it, but that was not said. However, a couple things that were said at Brian Callahan's side scrum, and this is going in on the Will Levis conversation we just had about the Cam Ward maybe not fitting the offense but being more talented, is Brian Callahan talked a lot about working with players versus fixing their flaws, and also not removing things that make them great that could be perceived as a flaw. And Callahan specifically cited Patrick Mahomes when talking about this to say, like, there are things you saw on tape in college that you'd say when he gets to the NFL, that's not going to work, you got to fix it. But he specifically mentioned Patrick Mahomes' ability to create and improvise out of structure as being his superpower, and that how you got to work with some of that stuff. And it just gets the gears turning in my mind, Justin. Again,
I knew it would. I saw it on Twitter, and I thought of you immediately because credit you. You have said on here when I've talked about the ill-advised throws and the wants to generate explosives, you have actually said, I think it was on the Travis Wingfield episode, right, where we did the Cam Ward breakdown, where both you and Travis said, you don't want to coach that out of them. You almost just got to live with it. And again, I hate to use the Josh Allen thing, but we say it about Josh Allen all the time, right? Where it's like, he does some dumb stuff, but you don't want to coach it out of him because 6, 7, 8 times out of 10, when he does something like that, it generates a massive explosive and swings the outcome of the game. So my mind went right there, and I knew yours did too.
So all this is to say is that, Borgonzi and Callahan, Borgonzi mentioned they've been having meetings after work hours, lunch meetings. They've been having late nights already as it creates camaraderie and bonding amongst the staff, talking about the draft. And I guarantee you, Borgonzi has brought up Patrick Mahomes. Borgonzi was there when they drafted Mahomes in Kansas City. And Callahan is now using Patrick Mahomes as not a comparison to any specific player in this class, but as an example of not wanting to remove something from a player's game that could become their superpower. And Callahan literally used the words superpower in his answer here. So I do think this one is notable because, again, this could be about anything or anyone. And the question was more specifically about Will Levis, actually, and working through Will Levis's flaws and how he sort of failed to fix Will Levis. Because Callahan also talked about how you got to be realistic with yourself. You can't assume you're going to be able to fix something that may not be correctable. But anyway, it just got me thinking, these guys have been talking a lot, and there's no doubt in my mind Cam Ward, obviously Cam Ward has come up, but it sounds like if you read between the lines and cut through the coach speak, maybe there is a chance that the Titans are liking what they've seen, at least in part, of Cam Ward's game.
Yeah, I think my mind went right there as well. There's no doubt about it. And again, Shedeur, he doesn't have that physical superpower. I think no one, even if you want to call the accuracy or the post snap read, the rhythm and timing, you want to call that a superpower, sure. But when I think of the word superpower, I really think of a physical upside, a raw ability that really makes you or gives you the potential to be special. Right.
So anyway, couple final items from Callahan's press conference we're going to hit quickly, and media scrum we're going to hit quickly, and then we'll move on, talk about Borgonzi a bit here. But Callahan said if the Titans find a left tackle, they would be open to moving J.C. Latham to right tackle because it's about getting the 2 best tackles on the field. I'm not going to go deep on that. Just thought it was notable because we've all kind of been under the impression that they wouldn't want to move J.C. Latham. He played right tackle in college, and he comes to the NFL, plays left tackle for a year, and now you're going to move him back to the right side. It's like snip, snap, snip, snap, the old Office quote meme. But yeah, I think that's notable. We don't need to narrow, as analysts, we don't need to narrow our evaluation down to only guys we think would fit on the right side, because the Titans might be open to signing or drafting a player that plays on the left and then moving Latham. Another thing Callahan said that's just notable, we can't not say it. Callahan said he'd love to have Nick Westbrook-Ikhine back on the roster.
Makes sense. We're a couple weeks outside of free agency. If they're going to re-sign him, They've got about 2.5, 3 weeks to do it before he gets to test the open market. So definitely, a team first player they'd like to have back.
And last thing I want to hit on from Callahan is obviously he was asked about Travis Hunter, talked about Travis Hunter. Here's what he had to say about Travis Hunter.
And you watch his tape and you see his ability to play both at a very high level. So, I think anybody that you talk to about him is going to say the same thing, that he's got the ability to play both. And that I think you're going to find out where he fits if you were to get him. But he's got a really unique ability to do a lot of different things. Well, you got to start somewhere. You got to put your teeth in a position first, and then you see where you can add him in. So he can return punts. He can, he's got a really unique skill set that I don't think there's many players you can compare him to. I would say you probably start him. He probably starts at corner. And then you find ways to interject him into the offense as he gets more comfortable. He plays more and more offensively. But I think his corner is probably his starting point. In my opinion, you might get varying opinions on that, but then I think he's got a real role as a receiver.
Interesting note there. I think, Justin, you pointed this out. Callahan sees Travis Hunter starting at cornerback. Obviously, he sees him playing in multiple spots, but again, you can only be in position meetings for one position at a time. You can't be in the wide receiver meetings and the cornerback meetings at the same time. So you got to start with one position. I think the notable thing is that he doesn't see him as a receiver to start. He sees him as a corner, and that's notable for us talking about what the Titans might do at number 1. Why?
Yeah, I had a really strong take on this. People can push back if they'd like, but to me, if you see him primarily as a corner, and it seems like a lot of teams do, I'd go as far as saying maybe the consensus is that he's a corner. He's listed as a corner at the combine. I know that doesn't mean a lot, but if you kind of start to put all these things together, I think you're able to paint a bit of a picture here. I just don't see how you could justify that at number 1 overall. First thing I'll say, do you know when was the last time a corner went number 1 overall in the draft?
Was it never?
It was before the NFL-AFL merger. So it hasn't happened since before 1970. Put it that way. Linebackers have gone number 1 overall. Running backs have gone number 1 overall. A corner hasn't. Now, I'm not going to debate that those positions are more important than corner. They're not in the modern day game. But one still hasn't gone number 1 overall. Then I added in the fact that I look at this roster. It is one of the worst in the NFL. They're 3-14. It's a bad roster. What's one of the strongest positions on it? Corner. You're going to take a corner number 1 when you've got L'Jarius Sneed, Chido Awuzie, Roger McCreary, Jarvis Brownlee. I will play devil's advocate against myself. If L'Jarius Sneed and Chido Awuzie aren't good in 2025, they're probably not here in 2026. Roger McCreary's entering a contract year. No telling that they're going to want to re-sign a nickel corner. This corner room could be really bad in 2026. It could be very different. So there could be a pathway where you draft him, and all of a sudden you don't have a very good corner room, and you're thankful that you have him. But are you going to draft a non-common position at number 1 overall? Because things might go wrong with the current players you have at that position on the roster. And look, the ability to play, he's not just a regular corner. I get that. He is special. He might be able to play both ways. You might get him into a package on offense. But for me, if you're already telling me that you primarily see him as a corner, I just don't see how this team could justify that at number 1. I love the prospect. I really do. I'm still a little hesitant to believe the two-way thing's going to be a full-time thing. Why? Because I don't believe that everyone is Babe Ruth or Shohei Ohtani, right? Like, I'm always in see it to believe it mode when I hear someone is that special, and he might be that special. I think he's a hell of a prospect, but I'm always going to pump the brakes on that. And I just, after those comments to me, he said he probably starts at corner. That's where he thinks he fits more than anywhere else. With this roster, what you already have there, based on the history of the position, like, you've got an edge that I think is more of a straightforward evaluation that could go number 1. You're mauling a couple quarterbacks there. There's no lineman, of course, an offensive lineman. That's the 3rd most common position at number 1. But I think if you don't like Abdul Carter, you don't like the quarterbacks, I think you try like heck to trade down. I don't take the guy that I think's a corner at number 1.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't know if I've said this on this podcast before, but I think the worst thing this team could do is stick at number 1 and take either Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter. If your goal is to get Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter on your roster, trade the pick, because you can get one of them for sure at number 3. Because if you trade the pick to 1, someone's taking a quarterback. The Browns might take one of those 2 guys, or they might take Shedeur Sanders. And then at number 3, you have your choice between the 2. If the Browns take one of them, then you get the other one at 3. Now you have to like both of them equally to do that. But
well, I don't know. I agree with you. I will say the only issue with that, and I fully agree, but the issue is the Giants are the only possibility where that happens. If
True.
you're trading the pick to anyone else, I mean, maybe Cleveland, of course, but if you're trading it to anyone else, you're not guaranteeing yourself. And there's a good chance if you trade it anywhere else, 4, 5, 6, 7, you're not getting one of them. That's a very real possibility.
No, that's a good point. All right, so that's Callahan. Covered Callahan very, very thoroughly, maybe too thoroughly, 26 minutes into the podcast now. Let's move on and talk about what Mike Borgonzi said. Now, Borgonzi, I took a lot of notes while I was watching these press conferences. My notes for Borgonzi are more than twice as long as my notes for Callahan, and we just spent, like I said, 26 minutes on Callahan. So we're going to speed this up a little bit here, but let's stick on the Travis Hunter convo because he talked about Hunter as well, and just generational players in general, because Borgonzi had a lot to say about that. But when it comes to Travis Hunter specifically, here's what Borgonzi said.
He's a special player, yeah, for sure. We were watching him, and I don't know if there's anybody that's actually done what he's done in the modern day football, playing both offense and defense during the course of a season. So he's a special player.
And then he was asked about him a little bit later, and he went on, and this is what he said then.
You've seen it, you've seen tape of it, and playing corner and receiver. So I think he can do both at a high level.
Now, we just talked a lot about Travis Hunter, but it's worth mentioning that Callahan mentioned you would inject him into the offense and have packages for him. Borgonzi mentioned he could play both at a high level. So there is a chance that the Titans value him as more than just a corner. There's also a chance they're just saying what everyone else has already said about Travis Hunter, and we're not learning anything new. But on that subject of, generational players, because I think you and I agree, if there was a generational player in this draft class, it would be Travis Hunter. I don't view Abdul Carter as a generational player at the edge position. He's not a better prospect than Myles Garrett. He's not a better prospect than either Bosa brother. I mean, yeah. I might go as far as to say Chase Young was a better prospect. Now, obviously, Chase Young's NFL career has been hampered by injury, but would you disagree with that?
Yeah, I don't think you'd be wrong to say that. There'll be a lot of, recency bias if they call you crazy. I thought Chase Young was a freaking unbelievable prospect.
He was as can't miss as it gets at the edge position, I thought. I mean, he was a shoo-in for Defensive Rookie of the Year, and I won hundreds of dollars betting on that year. So, I don't think personally that there is a generational player in this draft unless it's Travis Hunter, and that's if he goes on to play both sides of the football.
Right. With some consistency too, right? It's not like 10 offensive snaps a game. Like, that's not enough. Right.
Not the Adoree Jackson package we saw in 2018.
Right.
But Mike Borgonzi may disagree, or he may just be saying things to, again, generate buzz for a trade and create, the leverage he needs to get the haul that he wants. But here's what he said about generational players. He said,
"Listen, there's a handful of players, anytime at the top of the draft that you would deem generational talents, and we certainly feel that way this year as well."
And we certainly feel that way this year as well. He was then asked, what is generational?
Well, it's a real skill set of talent, an impact player that can take the team to another level, whatever position it is. And then they also have to have the character makeup as well to go with it.
So to Borgonzi, generational doesn't necessarily mean once in a generation. It might just mean blue chip player, right? I mean, based on what he said here. Do you disagree?
No, and again, like for me, look, I also want to open the possibility, just because I said it, like, could he be a corner only and be generational? Yeah. Like, Darrelle Revis is, I'm not thinking of the prospect, I'm thinking of the NFL career, right? Yeah. Like, if we knew Darrelle Revis was going to be that good, if we knew Charles Woodson was going to be that good, those are generational players, Hall of Fame blue chip players. Maybe they think Travis Hunter is a future Hall of Famer at cornerback. That's generational, even at just one position. No doubt about it. So, but yes, I would ultimately agree.
Yeah, so maybe the Titans do view those guys as generational. Maybe they view Cam Ward as generational. Maybe Borgonzi sees even more similarities than I do to Patrick Mahomes in terms of the off-script playmaking ability and the clutch gene and all the things that I've said about Cam Ward that I love so much. Maybe Borgonzi feels the same way. He hasn't tipped his hand one way or the other. In fact, he's not tipping his hand at all. Here's what Borgonzi had to say about the possibility of trading the number 1 pick.
I would say we've had some phone calls. Yeah, I'll keep those phone calls to to the vest, but we've had some phone calls, yeah.
So they have had some phone calls about the number one pick, as we expected. This also comes on the heels of, every coach and GM is speaking at this combine. Not every, as I mentioned earlier, but most coaches and GMs are speaking at the combine either Tuesday or Wednesday, except for Brian Schottenheimer. He's the only guy talking on Thursday. Why? I don't know. Special treatment for the Cowboys? Who the hell knows? But there came reports out, not even reports. These coaches and GMs of other teams, of the Giants, Joe Shane, of the Raiders, have said, we are open to trading up in this draft. They also said, we're open to trading down. They also said they're open to sticking and picking. They're open to everything. This is ridiculous. I'm getting tired of people taking the Raiders are open to trading up or down in the draft and posting it as news. Like, no shit. They're open to it. They're all open to everything. It's February. The draft is 2 months away. Anyway, Borgonzi talking about keeping things close to the vest. Not going to tell us who he's had phone calls with, but he has had phone calls about potentially moving the number one pick. Notable or not notable?
I guess not notable, right? Like you'd expect that. I don't know that anyone's ever had the number one pick and not taken a phone. Like the Bears knew they were taking Caleb Williams. I'm sure someone still called and said, "Hey, is there any way we could change your mind?" Right? So it's like not notable at all.
A couple more thoughts on potential trades. So there's been a lot made about we want as many top 100 picks as we can get quote that came out of his introductory press conference, Borgonzi's introductory press conference.
Well, actually, I'll correct you quickly on that, I think, because and maybe
Brinker?
I'm wrong. And
was it Brinker?
I'm an idiot. I think it was Chad Brinker who said that on radio that day. He said, ideally, you'd love to have 12 top 100 picks in the next 3 drafts. Chad Brinker, I think, who said that. And it was a little bit specific, right? Like over the next 3 drafts.
You are correct that it was Brinker to say that. But today at the Combine presser, here's what Borgonzi said.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the goal we stated to like I said, draft picks are our biggest form of currency. So, we're always going to try to gather as many picks in the top 100 as we can.
Something about the way that he said this to me. Now, again, maybe I'm viewing everything through the confirmation bias lens of I want the Titans to draft Cam Ward, so I don't think they're going to trade the number one pick because I think they are going to take him with that pick. But so grain of salt. But to me, this felt more like he was talking about a general draft approach. We always want to have as many top 100 picks as we can get. Like, obviously, the more top 100 picks you can get, the better. And maybe that means you move back from 35 to acquire a few more top 100 picks. Maybe it means you are in love with a player at 35, so you don't do that this year. But next year, circumstances are different and you might look to acquire. I think people are taking and running with the we want as many top 100 picks as possible thing to mean the Titans really do want to trade down. And maybe they do, but I don't think we are learning that from Borgonzi at the podium. I think if he is trying to say that, it's to generate interest to see what kind of haul could be on the table if they decide to move out of the pick. He also said something really interesting in regards to acquiring players through the trade market.
But we have to be disciplined through the process here. As we're going through and looking at free agents and, possible trades, we certainly want to hold on to our draft picks as much as we can.
So the Titans, I would say, number one, we don't know if they want to trade back or not. I don't think that these quotes tell us they do or don't. They're just words. And number two, do not expect the Titans this year to do what we saw Rand Carthon do, trading a third-round pick for L'Jarius Sneed. I don't think if this new regime is going to be dealing picks for players, it's going to be conditional sevenths for fringe roster guys. They are not going out to trade for a big name player to boost this roster. That's not how they're going to do it. Borgonzi wants to draft and develop.
Yeah, I think that's been obvious from the moment he got the job, right? Like him and Breaker have consistently talked about even taking a bit of a slow build approach, building the roster through the draft and retaining their own talent, right? So no, there's going to be no more L'Jarius. It's probably not even going to be Calvin Ridley's. Where this free agency period, you're going to see 4 years, $100 million. I don't know if it was today, but when Borgonzi's talked about free agency in general, he's talked a lot about adding high character guys. Like it's very clear that this is going to be not going to be an aggressive approach when it comes to acquiring veterans who are not currently on the team. I do land somewhere in the middle regarding the trade down thing. I agree with you that he's not flat out telling us they want to trade down. No, of course not. They're not saying that. I will say the only reason that it is somewhat interesting is because going all the way back to that Brinker comment, it was oddly specific when he said 12 top 100 picks in the next 3 drafts. But again, he also went on to say, we're not going to pass on a blue chip generational player at number one. So they've said both, but I do think because of the Brinker comments, it's at least mildly interesting.
Yeah, I agree. It's mildly interesting, but it's not something that everyone's taking it and running with it.
They didn't tell us what they're going to do at number one.
It's too much. Another note on free agency here. So they asked him about, sort of like being aggressive or non-aggressive in free agency. And here's what he had to say about their free agent plan.
Well, I think in the press conference, our philosophy is we want to draft and developed. That's going to be our number one thing, number one priority. But to be selective is just to have discipline in the process. We're going to have targeted players that we want. And if sometimes, that player doesn't come to us, we're not just going to jump to the next player. We're going to have players that we're going to target, and you have to have discipline throughout that process as well.
This to me is like as direct as he will ever get in taking, not a shot, but in critiquing, I guess, the Titans' approach to free agency last year, where you and I have talked a lot about on this podcast when the Titans reportedly wanted to bring back Danico Autry and Azeez Al-Shire, and they missed on those guys. Now, we never got 100% confirmation it was those guys, but Rand Carthon even said there were a couple players we wanted to sign that we were unable to sign, and when we realized we had extra money to play with, we pivoted to Calvin Ridley. That will never happen under this new regime. They will never pivot to another player mid-free agency because somebody they wanted signed somewhere else. So I think it's worth noting that, number one, this is a better approach. This is targeted, strategic,
focused, targeted approach.
Exactly. And number two, maybe it's less exciting because it was pretty damn exciting last March when you get that phone notification out of nowhere. Titans are signing Calvin Ridley.
Yeah. And then 3-14, right? So that's what really matters. So yeah, but I'm with you. Like I think it's very clear that the approach, I hate to use the same words, but targeted, focused, there are going to be things they want to check off a list when they're going after someone, right? It's production, it's age, it's dollar value, it's character. And if they're going to pivot to someone else, they're going to have to make sure that the next guy checks all of those boxes too. And if they don't, they're not going to pursue it.
Right. Real quickly here, something I found mildly interesting. We don't have to spend a lot of time on because there are other things I do want to spend more time on. He was asked about, profiles, like draft profiles, analytic profiles. How much do the measurables, the numbers you're getting at this event in Indianapolis right now, how much do they impact your draft board and all that? And here's what he had to say on that.
We do. We always have, you don't want to make exceptions at certain positions. So we'll have a profile for each position. Now, you never want to just throw away a good football player if he doesn't fit those measurables. But we certainly have profiles for every position in terms of, when we're making acquisition periods, whether it's free agency or the draft.
And then in terms of the impact of that on their draft board, he did say they have an initial board set right now. He said these measurables may cause guys to move up or down a little bit, but he said it's not going to change a lot from where it is right now. The character stuff, the medical stuff, and the testing stuff could have some impacts, but it will be minor changes because he said this.
We try not to make drastic changes, Paul, on it, but some of the medical information obviously will affect that. Some of the testing does move guys up and down the board a little bit. But we try not to make drastic measures. We want to be a tape-driven team and really not just depend on these other variables that come in.
I think that number one is the right approach. I'm a fan of that approach. I'm growing more and more confident. I was already very confident, but I'm continuing to be very confident in Mike Borgonzi as the person to lead this roster rebuild. But that's interesting to me that obviously every team probably has these kind of profiles, but they're also willing to make the occasional exception if they believe a guy is truly a good football player.
I think it's the right way to approach it because, look, everyone loves an underdog hero story, but if you're an offensive tackle and you've got 31.5-inch arms, 32-inch arms, that just doesn't meet a lot of thresholds for NFL teams around the league. So that's kind of the first thing my mind goes to is when they've got profiles. It's like, we like offensive tackles that have X long arms or hit this weight threshold or this speed threshold, yada, yada. But if there's a guy that we really like and his arms are a bit shorter, that fall just short of our desired profile, then we're going to think long and hard about that one and say, should we make an exception for this player? That's the right way to do it. Because I think, you got to be realistic. You know that these profiles exist for a reason. There are certain things you need typically to have success at the position, but there are some exceptions, and we're not going to just, we're not just going to look at numbers and blindly follow the numbers. We've got to analyze players on a case-by-case basis.
Right, which, again, that's the right approach. One more quick thing here, and then I want to dive a little deeper into what he said about quarterbacks and what he said about the offensive line. Those are my last two big topics. Quickly, though, he said, this is just kind of interesting to me, and this is one I'm reading into more than what he actually said, but Paul Kaharski directly asked him, do you expect to compete this season? And here's what he said.
Our hope is to compete every year for a division, Paul. But it's a process. So hopefully we're in contention this year. You always want to manage expectations, though. So as we go through this process, we acquire players. I think we'll have a better idea as we head into the season.
Justin, is he trying to tell us this is a 2-year rebuild? Don't expect us to win the division in 2025?
Well, I think they know that unless they strike gold at quarterback this offseason, then this is going to take multiple years. And I don't want to draw again, it could mean, if we take a young quarterback, we know those usually struggle, or we're going to go again, you could draw what you want, or they're probably going to go the bridge option, take a patient approach, and they know that probably means you only win 6, 7, 8 games. I do think they know that the general makeup of this roster right now is one that needs more than one offseason to fix.
Yeah. All right. Two final major topics to hit here. What Borgonzi said about quarterbacks, I think is really, this is the truly, really interesting stuff. And then what he said about offensive line, I also think is very interesting. Before I tell you what he said there, I'm going to remind everyone that this podcast is brought to you by Sinkers Beverages in East Nashville, the premier wine, spirits, and beer store serving the community since 1985. Their knowledgeable staff is proud to help you with large parties, themed events, or finding something unique for a special occasion. From birthday parties to milestone celebrations to everyday moments, Sinkers can help with the right drink for every occasion. If you head to the sinkersbeverages.com website or check the link in this podcast description, you can join the In Crowd. In Crowd members get access to allocated wines and spirits, exclusive events, early access to barrel releases, and more. Plus, Sinkers Beverages is available on Uber Eats. All right, let's talk about what Borgonzi said about the quarterback position. I'm going to start with this quote here.
I mean, it's arguably the most important position in sports, the quarterback position. So you have to get that right. We have to solidify that position. And we have Will on the roster right now, and he's going to compete with whoever we bring in. We have one quarterback on the roster, so we're bringing people in. And Will compete with them as well.
So Will, meaning Will Levis, will compete. They will bring in quarterbacks. Will Levis will be on the roster in August to compete with those quarterbacks. Will he be on the roster in September? Probably not. We'll find out. But he obviously, they have to get quarterback right. Does that mean we can't draft the wrong guy at the top of this draft? Or does it mean we can't pass on the right guy at the top of this draft?
Glass half full, right? Look, I think either way, both, right? They can't draft the wrong one at number one. I've said that would be catastrophic. You've said that's no big deal. Who cares? No, I'm kidding. But it's like, no, they
I have
can't
said
draft.
that. I'll own that. I have said that. It's not a big deal. Just draft another one in a couple of years. Why does everyone care so much?
That's not the way I feel. I think it's catastrophic when you miss a quarterback at number one. So, and I think he would probably tend to agree. In terms of Will's going to compete, I mean, not if they draft one at number one. Let's be honest. They might hold a bullshit fake competition, but if they draft one at number one, that guy's more than likely going to play as soon as September rolls around, especially if the other option is Will Levis, right? They're going to play the young guy. And honestly, I find it hard to believe that anything they do at quarterback is going to give Will Levis a realistic option to compete. Like, if it's Aaron Rodgers or Kirk Cousins or Sam Darnold, Will Levis isn't competing with that guy either. Now,
right.
The only way Will Levis is competing is if it's a mid-round quarterback, a second, third, or fourth rounder, or it's like Justin Fields or Mason Rudolph. I can't see that being that would be quite the half measure that guarantees Nissan Stadium is empty all of next season, right? So if it's Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders at number one, or it's Aaron Rodgers, Sam Darnold, Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, Matthew Stafford, Will Levis is not realistically competing with any of those quarterbacks, especially with the commitment probably that it takes to bring one of those guys in. So Will Levis will be on the roster because he's cheap, he's affordable, he's even a high upside number two. But I find it hard to believe that whatever they're doing at quarterback will give Will Levis a realistic opportunity to compete for the starting job.
Yeah, I agree. More on the quarterback though here, and this one was really interesting to me. Firstly, they were asked about the rare opportunity to draft to be at the top of the draft, not near, at the top of the draft. Is that a situation where you have to take advantage of having a number one pick as a quarterback needy team and just take a quarterback? And here's what he said about that.
Sure, I mean, you can think that way. But, at the end of the day, we have to make the best decision at this point for the Titans. And if we deem like taking a quarterback is the most important thing right now, then we'll do that. But we have to go through this process here. So this is like one touch point in the process. We've gone through the whole evaluation part. Now we're finally getting to sit down and meet with these guys and talk with them. We'll have pro days. They'll have 30-day visits. So we have to go through the whole process really to make that decision.
So as a, staunch Cam Ward supporter, this one hurt me a little bit because part of my argument for drafting Cam Ward has been how many times are you going to be at the top of the draft? You could build up the roster around your quarterback next year when you might still have a top 10 pick, but probably not the number one pick, versus this year when you have the number one pick and you can take the number one player who I think is Cam Ward, you should take him. Borgonzi, maybe he's just coach speaking us again, doesn't necessarily agree.
Well, I agree with what he said, and I hope he's telling the truth because he agrees with me. It's obvious to me that you've think back to the Kenny Pickett year, right? Like if this was that draft class, did the Titans take Kenny Pickett, Desmond Ridder, or Malik Willis number one overall? If they're in the same position they're in, no. They take Aiden Hutchinson or Trayvon Walker because that was the best prospect and there wasn't a quarterback worthy going number one overall. So it depends on how they feel about these quarterbacks. If they don't think Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders are a franchise quarterback, then no, they don't take them at number one, and they take Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, or they trade down. It's that simple, and that's what I've been saying the whole time.
Yeah, no, you're right. Last little thing on quarterbacks here. Last quote I want to hit here is Borgonzi said something that I think we all assume, but it's very noteworthy to have it confirmed to us, assuming he's telling the truth.
We could sign a quarterback in free agency and also draft a quarterback as well.
And he went on to say,
depends on the situation. The places I've been, we've always had, older quarterbacks kind of mentor the younger quarterback. It's almost like another coach in the room for them, just to kind of show them how to be a pro, teach them all the little things about protection and just how to study opponents. That would probably be a priority for us if we did end up drafting a quarterback.
So this one is very interesting to me because, again, we kind of assumed that they could draft and sign a guy, but he basically said if we draft a guy, we will have a veteran quarterback here. Whether that's an Aaron Rodgers level, Matthew Stafford level veteran, probably not if you're drafting a guy unless you want to get ridiculed like the Falcons were ridiculed for signing Kirk Cousins to a 3-year mega contract and then drafting Michael Penix in the top 10. But a guy who has been around the league that can come in and help a rookie learn, who accepts his role as a backup veteran to come and help this rookie along and be that another coach in the room. Just an interesting thing to note that he told us that. Like that wasn't something I was expecting him to tell us.
Yeah, it depends what veteran you're going after, right? Like conceivably speaking, a guy like Aaron Rodgers, Matthew Stafford, and Kirk Cousins, I think all three of them are old enough. Even Derek Carr to a degree. He's not super old, but he's a borderline starting quarterback at this stage, right? So conceivably, you could draft a quarterback and bring one of those guys in. Now, you got to assess the optics of that. Like, is doing that with Aaron Rodgers smart? I don't know, right? Based on the things we've heard about him. I think like a Kirk Cousins, for example, it shocked him last year when they took Penix. I don't think it's going to shock him this year if he goes to a team that drafts a quarterback, right? So I could see something like that, where even Stafford, where he's a high-end starting quarterback still, but he also knows he's old enough that he's not going to be around forever, right? Like, so...
But the other flip side of that is we're talking about the guys in control of the brain trust, Borgonzi and Brinker.
Right.
Brinker was in Green Bay when they drafted Jordan Love, and he sat for a long time. Borgonzi was in Kansas City when they drafted Mahomes, and he sat his entire rookie season outside of a meaningless Week 17 game against the Broncos where he looked like a future star in the league against backups, but then he went on to be a future star in the league. So there is the possibility that they do go after an Aaron Rodgers, expecting him to be a one-year starter, still draft a quarterback in the first round or highly or number one overall, and expect Rodgers to be the starter this year and say, we want this rookie to learn behind a future Hall of Famer before he ever takes the field. So I think basically all options, as I said before, What we learned in this press conference is that all options are on the table.
The interesting thing there would be, what does that do to Will Levis? Because you're not carrying Will Levis as your number 3 quarterback. You're trading him at that point during training camp.
Whatever you can get for him, because otherwise you're cutting him, and
you've got no leverage at that point. So
right, exactly, yes. But they will have at least 3 quarterbacks on the roster in training camp. So Will Levis will be on this roster in training camp, because you can't go into training camp with only 2 quarterbacks.
My point is, you've got no leverage, and you admit that you've admitted you're cutting ties with him.
Yeah, no doubt about that. It's basically like, someone give us a conditional 7th to be first to claim him when he hits waivers, because otherwise you got to go through the process. All right, that is what he said about quarterbacks, and I thought that last part was the most notable. Let's talk about offensive line really quick, because he was basically asked, like, have you started identifying the strengths and weaknesses of your roster, essentially? And he's like, yeah, I think this is a strength. The interior defensive line is a strength, but we've also been identifying weaknesses. And here's what he said about their biggest weakness.
We have to get better throughout the offensive line, and that's going to be a priority for us.
Now, obviously, we all recognize that, but something that makes this even more intriguing to me is that a little earlier in the press conference, Paul Kaharski, again, asked him, this team has spent a lot of draft capital on the offensive line. Does that preclude you from spending a large amount of draft capital on the offensive line this year? And here's what Borgonzi said.
No, not necessarily. I think we're starting this off on a clean slate right now. And offensive line, like I said, is going to be a top priority, whether that's through free agency, the draft, or anything, waiver claims, trades. We're going to look on every avenue really to add to that group. And I think the most important part too is adding the right type of players to that group too. So that's a tight knit group, that offensive line. So getting tough guys in there, smart, dependable, good teammates. The characteristics for that group are very important.
So he talked multiple different answers twice in this press conference, called offensive line a priority, and talked about how, yeah, this team before I got here has spent high picks on offensive linemen. They missed. That's not going to stop us from spending high picks on offensive linemen. It's not going to stop us from targeting offensive linemen in free agency if we believe that they fit this roster and are smart, dependable, tough guys that can come in and be contributors. So they're going to attack the offensive line. And I think this was maybe the biggest read between the lines moment is, when free agency opens, I would expect to see the Titans make a move on the line right away. Because Borgonzi also said they want to fill as many roster holes as possible through free agency so that they have more flexibility in the draft. Every general manager says that. That's the right approach. But interesting that he said that, and is being like, he is so keyed in on building this offensive line. And there's no offensive lineman you're picking with number 1 pick. So how are you going to do it? Free agency and later rounds in the draft.
Or if they trade down, it's crazy to say, like, further than we think, 7, 8, 9, 10 overall, they might go with an offensive lineman there. To be honest with you, like, it would be a little.
Very true.
It would be a little. What's the word I'm looking for? Like not melodramatic. Damn it, I can't think of the word now.
It would be disheartening and disappointing, because it's not the exciting thing that we want them to do, even if it makes the team good and better.
Yeah, like it would be a little. The excitement for having the number 1 overall pick would all of a sudden crash a little bit, I think, in most people's minds. But it's an important aspect of this team. They need to upgrade it. We know it's bad. We know it's really bad, in all honesty. And like you said, he doesn't care they missed on NPF and Dylan Radins. Like, he wasn't here for it. Who gives a shit? Either of those guys are probably going to be on the team next year anyway. Now, They spent capital on J.C. Latham and Peter Skoronski, and I think they probably hit on those guys as at least being above average NFL starters. The story's still to be written, but those guys are going to be starting for you next year, and you think they're going to be pretty good. So they hit on those guys, but he wasn't here for it. All he knows is he's inheriting an offensive line that sucks, has at least 2 holes on it, and he's got to spend capital to improve it, because it's one of the most important aspects of the football team.
Yeah, exactly. And that's basically what kept the Titans from being competitive most of last year, was the huge hole on the right side of the line and the quarterback. But if the offensive line was better, you'd probably get better quarterback play. Even if it's not good, it's probably better than it was. All right, so that's pretty much, those were the interesting things that I thought Borgonzi said in his presser. And he said a few things in his little side scrum, but I don't really think they're that interesting. He said that, we mentioned this at the top, arm strength is not that big of an issue for Shedeur Sanders because he has the trait of anticipation. He said anytime you're trading the number 1 pick, you would expect a big return. No shit. So nothing super notable coming out of the scrum, but some stuff that we can sort of parse through and read between the lines on from his combine presser. And I think it was a good call by us, Justin, to do this bonus podcast, because look how freaking long we talked about it for.
This is probably our longest episode in a very, very long time, but hopefully you guys enjoy it. It's rare. The combine comes around once a year. It's even more rare where your team's got the number 1 overall pick. So it was very notable to see the new GM head coach combo at the podium, talking to reporters for more than 30 minutes in total. So definitely glad we did this, learned a lot from it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. We got a super exciting episode on deck for later this week. Should we tell them?
It happens, so we can tell them. No one's canceling.
Here's what I'll say. One person on our last video correctly guessed who the mystery former NFL quarterback
I might have
turned
said
analyst.
it in another comment now that I think so. Maybe someone read through all the comments and spotted it. And if that's what you did, then kudos to you.
I think all you said was he's a content creator now, and this other person put the pieces together and figured it out. Yes, we'll be having Ben Kurt on the podcast, former NFL quarterback, now the creator of the Dime Lab, the YouTube channel that does a lot of quarterback film breakdown, is coming on the podcast to talk Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, compare and contrast a little bit, talk about what he likes, specifically about Cam Ward, because he loves Cam Ward. So, as Melo calls it, this was a Graver podcast.
It was a Graver podcast. I'm the one who ended up booking Kurt. I did it for Graver because I love him so much. Kurt is phenomenal. He's got a very successful YouTube channel, very successful social media presence in general. He knows quarterback play the position at a high level in college, play the position in the NFL. And he is refreshingly honest. I think you guys are going to be blown away. This is my read, and this is me. I didn't say this to him, but here's a guy who his opportunity in the NFL has come and gone. He knows that. He can accept that. He's not afraid to say what's on his mind. He doesn't give a shit. He tells you exactly what he's thinking when it comes to quarterback play. It was refreshingly honest. There is no relationship he came on here to protect, I think, is the vibe that I got. And while it was refreshing and it was super notable and knowledgeable, we learned a lot about quarterback play, learned a lot about Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. You guys are going to love this one.
I loved it, and I think you guys will love it too. So that's coming in a couple of days. Make sure you are subscribed to the Music City Audible channel so you don't miss that episode. Give this video a thumbs up, like, and drop a comment below. What was the most interesting thing you thought or you took away from Callahan and Borgonzi's press conference? Is there anything that we didn't hit that you're curious about? A quote that maybe it means something that it doesn't mean, or maybe you saw it on Twitter, but you didn't see it when you watched the press conference yourself. Let us know in the comments. We'll answer your questions about what some of this other stuff means, if we missed anything, or if anything interesting was said, in your opinion, that we didn't cover. Again, we talked for too long, so we can't hit everything, but let us know in the comments below. And again, we'll be back later this week. So until then, y'all stay safe out there, and
a Broadway sports media production.